You know, there are moments in life when you realize that the person you loved most, the one you sacrificed everything for, sees you as nothing more than an inconvenience, a relic, a shameful reminder of humble beginnings they'd rather forget. For me, that moment came on a Tuesday evening under the golden chandeliers of the Grand View Hotel ballroom, surrounded by 200 of the most successful people in the tech industry. My son Marcos stood at the podium in his $1,000 suit, talking about his journey to success. And when he mentioned me, when he finally acknowledged my existence after 40 minutes of talking about himself, he called me the old man who raised him. Just like that. 6 words. As if I were some stranger who happened to be there during his childhood, like a neighbor who occasionally waved from across the street. As if my entire existence, my entire life of sacrifice could be summed up in 6 dismissive words, spoken with a tone that made it clear he wished I wasn't even in that room. That was the moment everything I'd buried for years, every sacrifice I'd swallowed in silence, every hurt I'd pushed down into the depths of my soul, came rushing back like a tidal wave. And let me tell you, that was the drop that spilled the glass. If you want to discover how I showed them they messed with the wrong person, subscribe now to Top Life Stories, because my response, nobody saw it coming. My story is just beginning. Let me take you back to the very beginning so you can understand exactly how we arrived at that terrible, beautiful moment. My name is Roberto Delgado, and I'm 72 years old. I'm not a famous man. I never had a fancy title printed on business cards or a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. For most of my life, I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, doing whatever it took to put food on the table and keep a roof over our heads. I was a maintenance worker at a textile factory during the day, the kind of place where the machines never stopped humming and the air always smelled like oil and cotton dust. At night, I drove a taxi until my eyes could barely stay open, picking up drunk college kids and tired nurses finishing their shifts, listening to their stories, their complaints, their dreams. My hands are rough, deeply calloused from years of manual labor, the kind of hands that can't quite straighten anymore, fingers permanently curved from gripping tools and steering wheels. My back aches when I stand too long, a dull, persistent pain that shoots down my left leg if I'm not careful. I don't have a college degree. I barely finished high school because I had to start working at 16 to help my own parents, who were struggling to keep our family fed after my father lost his job at the cannery. But I had something that no university could teach me, something that couldn't be bought or earned through any degree program. I had love for my son, a fierce, unbreakable, sacrificial love that made me willing to give up everything, my comfort, my health, my future, my very identity, so he could have what I never did, so he could become someone, so he could matter in a world that had never given people like me a second glance. Marcos was born when I was 28 years old, back when I still had energy in my bones and hope in my heart. His mother, Elena, was the light of my entire life, the kind of woman who could make a cold winter morning feel warm just by smiling at you. We weren't rich. God knows we weren't rich, but we were happy in a way that money can't buy. We lived in a small 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of town, the kind of place where the pipes rattled every time someone upstairs took a shower and the neighbors were too loud on Friday nights. But it was ours. It had a tiny kitchen where Elena would dance while cooking, humming songs from her childhood in Mexico, and a living room barely big enough for our second-hand couch and a small television that only got 3 channels. But when Elena got pregnant, when we found out we were going to have a baby, I made a promise to myself and to her, a solemn vow that I repeated every single night before I fell asleep. Our child would have opportunities. He would go to college. He would wear a suit to work, not coveralls. He would never know the kind of struggle we knew, the kind of fear that comes from opening the mailbox and seeing bills you can't pay, the kind of shame that comes from having to choose between fixing the car or buying groceries. I was determined, I was committed, and I thought back then that if I just worked hard enough, if I just sacrificed enough, everything would work out, that love and effort would be enough. Elena passed away when Marcos was only 12 years old. Cancer took her fast, too fast, so fast that we barely had time to process what was happening before she was gone. One day she was laughing in the kitchen, dancing to that old radio. The next she was complaining about feeling tired. And then suddenly she was in a hospital bed, her beautiful brown skin turning grey, her hand growing colder in mine every day until that final morning when it stopped being warm at all. When she died, I thought I would die too. I genuinely believed my heart would just stop, that grief would physically kill me, and I'd follow her wherever souls go when they leave these bodies. But I couldn't. I couldn't die because I had Marcos, and he needed me more than ever. He'd lost his mother, the person who tucked him in at night and helped him with his homework and told him stories about her grandmother in Guadalajara. He couldn't lose his father too. So I swallowed my grief. I pushed it down so deep that I could barely feel it anymore, locked it in some dark corner of myself where it couldn't interfere with what needed to be done. And what needed to be done was simple. I had to be both parents now. I had to be mother and father, nurturer and provider, everything that boy needed to survive and thrive in a world that had just become infinitely harder and colder for him. So I worked harder. I picked up a third job on weekends, landscaping for wealthy families in the hills, trimming hedges and mowing lawns under the hot sun while they sat in their air-conditioned homes, occasionally glancing out the window to make sure I was working. I sold the car, the only car we'd ever owned, a beat-up Honda Civic that Elena had loved because it was ours, and I took the bus everywhere after that, adding 2 hours to my daily commute so I could save $300 a month for Marcos's future. I stopped buying new clothes. The shirts I wore to work were the same ones I'd had for 10 years, washed and re-washed until the colors faded and the collars frayed. I stopped going out. I stopped seeing friends. I stopped having any kind of life that wasn't directly related to work or to raising Marcos. I stopped living for myself entirely. Every decision I made, every dollar I earned, every moment of my existence was for him. And you know what? I didn't resent it. Not then, not for a long time, because when I looked at Marcos, when I saw him growing up smart and kind and full of potential, I felt like it was worth it. Every sacrifice felt worth it. Marcos was a bright kid, exceptionally bright actually. The kind of child teachers notice immediately. His teachers always told me he had potential, that he could go far if he had the right support, if he had someone who believed in him and invested in his education. And I made damn sure he had it. I made sure he had everything he needed. When he was in 8th grade, he got accepted into a special science and technology program at the magnet school across town. But it required expensive materials, lab fees, a graphing calculator that cost $200, and a laptop we couldn't afford. I took out a loan. I went to one of those predatory lenders that charge interest rates that should be illegal, and I borrowed $1,500 at 23% interest because my son needed those things, and I wasn't about to let him lose that opportunity over money. When he graduated top of his class from high school, when he walked across that stage and they called his name and announced he was the valedictorian, I cried. I sat in those hard plastic auditorium chairs with all the other parents, and I cried like a baby because I was so proud. So incredibly proud that this brilliant young man was mine, was the product of all those years of sacrifice. And then came the letter. The acceptance letter from Stanford University, one of the best schools in the entire country, maybe in the whole world. When Marco showed it to me, his hands were shaking, his eyes were wide with disbelief and joy. "Dad," he said, "I got in. I actually got in." And I hugged him, held him tight like I used to when he was small, and I told him I knew he would, that I always knew he was destined for great things. But then I saw the tuition, $60,000 a year, for 4 years. That's $240,000 total, not including books, housing, food, transportation. I stared at those numbers on the financial aid letter, and for a moment, I felt the world tilt. I didn't have that kind of money. Nobody in our family had ever had that kind of money. My entire life savings at that point was maybe $8,000, scraped together over decades of living as cheaply as possible. But I wasn't about to let him lose that opportunity. Wasn't about to watch his dreams die because of something as stupid and arbitrary as money. So I did what any father would do, what any father who truly loves his child would do without hesitation. I sold my mother's house, the house I grew up in, the one she left me when she passed away 3 years earlier. It was a small house in a decent neighborhood, nothing fancy, but it was the only real asset I had, the only thing of value. It broke my heart to see it go, to watch strangers walk through the rooms where I'd celebrated birthdays and Christmases, where my mother had cooked Sunday dinners and sung me to sleep when I was small. But I told myself it was worth it. Marcos's education was worth it. His future was worth infinitely more than my nostalgia, more than my memories. The house sold for $80,000 after the realtor took her cut. It wasn't enough for all 4 years, but it was a start. I took that money and I worked double shifts, picked up every overtime opportunity that came my way, worked holidays and weekends, and any time anyone needed someone to cover a shift. I sent him every penny I could. Every single penny. I lived on rice and beans and day-old bread from the discount bakery. I wore my clothes until they had holes. I never turned on the heat in winter, just wore extra layers and used a space heater in whatever room I was in. And I sent him money every month like clockwork, making sure he never had to worry, never had to work during the school year, never had to feel the kind of financial stress I lived with every single day. He called me once a month, sometimes less, usually on Sundays. The calls were brief, 15 minutes maybe, 20 if I was lucky. "How are you, Dad?" "I'm good, mijo. How are your classes?" "They're hard, but I'm managing." "That's good. That's real good. You need anything?" "No, I'm fine. The money you sent is enough." "You sure? I can send more if you need it." "No, Dad, really, I'm okay." And then we'd talk about nothing for a few more minutes, and he'd say he had to go, had to study or meet with a study group or something, and that would be it. I understood. I told myself I understood. College is demanding. He was busy. He was building his future. That's what mattered. That was all that mattered. But sometimes, late at night when I couldn't sleep, because my back hurt too much, or because I was adding up bills in my head trying to figure out how to make the numbers work, I'd wonder if he ever thought about me. If he ever wondered how I was managing, how I was affording to send him so much money on a maintenance worker's salary. But I never asked. I never wanted him to feel guilty. I never wanted him to feel like he owed me anything. This was my choice, my decision, my love. After Stanford, after 4 years of scraping and saving and working myself to exhaustion, Marcos told me he wanted to get his MBA, his master's degree in business administration. "It'll open doors, Dad," he explained on one of our Sunday phone calls. "All the top executives have MBAs. It's essential if I want to really succeed, if I want to run my own company someday." Another $80,000. I nearly laughed when he told me, not because it was funny, but because the absurdity of it was overwhelming. $80,000. I'd never even seen that much money in one place. By then, I'd exhausted my savings from selling the house. Every penny was gone, spent on his undergraduate education. But I didn't tell him that. I said, "Okay, mijo, if that's what you need, we'll figure it out." And I did figure it out in the most desperate way possible. I cashed out my retirement fund early, the 401k I'd been contributing to since I was 30 years old, 42 years of savings. The penalties were enormous. I lost 30% of it right off the top to taxes and early withdrawal fees. But it gave me $63,000. Not quite enough, but close. I took out another loan for the rest, used my apartment as collateral, risking the only home I had left, and I sent it to him. All of it. I was 60 years old by then, working like a man half my age, my body screaming at me to stop, to rest, to please just rest for one day, but I couldn't. Marcos needed this. He told me this degree would change everything, would be the key to the kind of success we'd always dreamed of, and I believed him. God help me. I always believed in him. When he graduated with his MBA, when he walked across that stage at the business school commencement in his cap and gown, I wasn't there. I couldn't afford the plane ticket to California. He understood, he said. "It's okay, Dad. I know you're busy with work." But I wasn't too busy. I just couldn't afford the $300 ticket. I couldn't afford to take time off work without pay. I couldn't afford anything that wasn't absolutely essential to survival. But I told him I was proud of him. I told him I knew he was going to do amazing things. And he did, or at least he tried to. He started his first company right after graduation, a tech startup, some kind of app that was supposed to revolutionize something. I never fully understood what. He was so excited about it, calling me late at night to tell me about his ideas, his vision, his 5-year plan. He'd talk for an hour, maybe more, using words I didn't understand. Terms like user acquisition and market penetration and venture capital. I didn't know what any of it meant, but I loved hearing the passion in his voice. For the first time in years, he sounded genuinely happy. He sounded like he had a purpose. He sounded alive. I'd listen to him talk, holding the phone to my ear even when my arm got tired, just happy to have this connection with my son, this glimpse into his world. "That's wonderful, mijo," I'd say whenever he paused. "I'm so proud of you." And I was. I was so incredibly proud. But then the company failed. It went under in less than 2 years. I didn't understand why exactly. Something about funding falling through, about the market not being ready, about competition from bigger companies. But the result was clear. It was over. And worse than that, Marcos was in debt. Serious debt. He called me one night, and I knew immediately something was wrong because it was Thursday, not Sunday, and his voice was shaking. "Dad," he said, and then he just broke down. He sobbed into the phone like he was 12 years old again, like when Elena died, and he cried for hours in my arms. "Dad, I lost everything. The company's gone. I owe $150,000 to creditors. My credit is destroyed. My life is over." I felt my heart break all over again, but differently this time. This wasn't grief. This was something worse. This was watching my son, my brilliant, talented son, believe he was a failure. "Mijo," I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could, "your life isn't over. You're 28 years old. You're smart. You're capable. This is just a setback." "But the debt, Dad, I don't know how I'll ever pay it back. I might have to declare bankruptcy. Everything I worked for, everything you sacrificed for, it's all gone." "No," I said firmly, "it's not gone. You're not gone. You're still here, you're still brilliant, and you're going to get through this. And I'm going to help you." "You can't, Dad. You don't have that kind of money. Nobody does." "Don't worry about that," I told him. "Just worry about taking care of yourself. Let me handle the rest." And I did. I took out another loan, the biggest one yet. I used what little equity I had left in a small rental property I owned, a tiny house I'd bought years ago, thinking it might generate some income for retirement. I borrowed $150,000 at a ruinous interest rate, the kind that would take me the rest of my life to pay off. The monthly payments were more than half my income. I knew mathematically I'd never pay it off. I'd die in debt. But what choice did I have? My son needed help. My son was suffering. And isn't that what parents do? Don't we throw ourselves in front of the train if it means saving our children? I gave him that money, every cent. I told him to pay off his debts, to clear his name, to start over with a clean slate. He cried when I told him. He said, "Dad, I don't know how to thank you. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." And I said, "You don't have to repay me, mijo. Just promise me you'll keep trying. Promise me you won't give up on your dreams." He promised. And I believed him. His second company, the one he runs now, the one that made him rich and famous, started 5 years ago. He'd spent 3 years working for other companies, saving money, rebuilding his reputation. And then he had a new idea, a better idea. He explained it to me on the phone, something about artificial intelligence and data analysis, about helping businesses make better decisions. I didn't understand it, but I could hear that same excitement in his voice, that same passion. And I thought, this is it. This is the one. He spent months putting together a business plan, pitching to investors, trying to raise capital. But nobody was biting. Nobody wanted to take a chance on someone whose first company had failed. He was getting desperate. I could hear it in his voice during our Sunday calls, the frustration, the fear that maybe this dream was dying too. Then one Sunday, he called me, and he was ecstatic. "Dad, I did it. I found an investor, someone who believes in my vision." "That's wonderful, mijo. Who is it?" "I don't know, actually. They want to remain anonymous. It's some wealthy benefactor who saw my pitch and liked it. They're giving me $500,000. $500,000. It's enough to get everything started, enough to build a real company." I smiled, holding the phone tight. "That's amazing, son. I'm so happy for you." "I can't believe someone actually believed in me," he said, and I could hear him choking up. "I can't believe someone saw potential in me after everything that happened." "I always believed in you," I said quietly. "Always." What I didn't tell him, what I never told him, was that I was that investor. That anonymous benefactor was me. I'd taken out the biggest loan of my life, $500,000, using every remaining thing I owned as collateral. My apartment, my rental property, even my car. The used car I'd finally bought after years of taking the bus. I put it all on the line. I went to a lawyer, paid him to set up an anonymous investment fund, some kind of legal structure I didn't fully understand, but that allowed me to transfer money without Marcos knowing it came from me. It cost me $5,000 just to set it up. $5,000 I didn't have, so I put it on a credit card. And then I transferred the $500,000 to his business account. I didn't want him to know it was me. I didn't want him to feel like he owed me, like his success wasn't his own. I didn't want him to feel guilty or beholden. I just wanted him to succeed. That was all I ever wanted, for him to have the life I never could, to be the man I always dreamed he could be. And I was willing to pay any price for that. Even if it meant I'd spend the rest of my life drowning in debt, even if it meant I'd never retire, even if it meant I'd die poor and exhausted and alone, it was worth it. He was worth it. And succeed he did. Oh God, did he succeed? His company took off like a rocket. Within the first year, they had major clients, big tech companies paying them millions for their services. Within 3 years, the company was valued at over $50 million. Marcos became a name in the industry, a rising star, the kind of person other entrepreneurs wanted to meet and learn from. He was invited to conferences all over the world. He was interviewed by business magazines, featured on podcasts, asked to give keynote speeches. He bought a huge house in the hills, one of those modern places with glass walls and infinity pools. He drove a Tesla, wore custom-made suits, had his hair cut by some celebrity stylist. He was living the dream. My dream for him. The dream I'd worked my entire life to make possible. I was so proud. I can't even describe how proud I was. I'd go to the corner store to buy groceries, and I'd see his face on the cover of a business magazine on the rack, and I'd buy every single copy they had. I'd take them home and spread them out on my little kitchen table and just stare at them. At his confident smile, at the headline calling him a tech visionary or the future of AI. I'd show them to my neighbors, to the guys I worked with at the factory, to anyone who would listen. "That's my son," I'd say, pointing at the cover. "That's my boy. That's Marcos." They'd congratulate me, tell me I must be so proud, and I'd nod and smile. But I never told them how I'd made it possible. I never told them about the loans, the sacrifices, the fact that I was eating ramen noodles for dinner so I could make my loan payments. I didn't need to tell them. Seeing Marcos succeed, seeing him happy, that was enough, or at least I thought it was enough. Our relationship changed over those years, gradually at first, then more dramatically. The Sunday phone calls became less frequent, every other week, then once a month, then even less than that. When we did talk, the conversations were shorter, more distant. "How are you, Dad?" "I'm good, Mijo. Working, keeping busy. How are you?" "Crazy busy. The company's growing so fast. We just hired 50 new people." "That's wonderful." "Yeah. Hey, I've got a meeting in 5 minutes. Can I call you back later?" He never called back. The visits stopped completely. He used to come see me a few times a year, stop by the apartment for an hour or two. But after his company took off, those visits ended. "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm just so busy." "You understand, right?" And I did understand. I told myself I understood. Important people have responsibilities. They have demands on their time. They have meetings and conferences and obligations. I couldn't expect him to make time for his old father who lived in a shabby apartment on the poor side of town. He had a life now, a big, important life. And I was just there. A relic from his past, a reminder of where he came from, a place he clearly didn't want to return to, not even for an afternoon. When I did see him, which was rare, maybe once or twice a year when he absolutely couldn't avoid it, it was brief and painful. He'd show up at my apartment looking uncomfortable, like he didn't want to be there, like the place embarrassed him. He'd sit on the edge of my old couch, checking his phone constantly, answering texts, his leg bouncing with impatience. We'd make small talk, awkward and stilted. I'd ask about the company, and he'd give me vague answers, clearly not interested in explaining anything to someone who wouldn't understand anyway. I'd offer him something to eat, and he'd decline, saying he had dinner plans, somewhere fancy, no doubt. He never asked how I was doing, never noticed that I was still working at 70, at 71, at 72, because I had no choice, because I had debts that would follow me to my grave. Never noticed that I lived in the same small apartment, that I didn't have a car anymore, that my clothes were old and worn, that I'd lost weight because I couldn't afford to eat properly. He never asked because he never really looked. Not at me, not at my life, not at what I'd become in the process of making him everything he was. I was invisible to him, a ghost from a past he'd rather forget. A chapter in his story he'd prefer to skip over, the difficult early years before the triumph, before the success, before he became someone important. Then came the invitation. It arrived in my mailbox on a Tuesday afternoon, mixed in with the usual bills and junk mail. A thick, cream-colored envelope with gold lettering, my name written in elegant script. I opened it carefully, wondering what it could be. "You're cordially invited to the Grandview Hotel for an evening celebrating the achievements of Marcos Delgado, CEO of Innovatech Solutions. Join us as we honor his rise to the top of the technology industry. Black tie required." Black tie. I stared at those words. I hadn't worn a tuxedo since Elena's funeral, and that one had been borrowed. I didn't own formal wear. I didn't own anything nice anymore. But this was Marcos's moment. This was him being celebrated, being honored. I couldn't miss it. I wouldn't miss it. So I went to a thrift store, spent 2 hours searching through racks of old suits until I found one that almost fit. A black suit with slightly worn elbows, but otherwise decent. $7. I bought it along with a white shirt that was a little yellow with age, but clean. $3. I polished my old dress shoes, the same ones I'd worn to Elena's funeral 20 years ago, until they shined as best they could. I looked at myself in the mirror the night of the gala, and I looked old, worn, out of place. But I was going. I was going to see my son be celebrated, and maybe, just maybe, this would be a moment we could share. Maybe he'd see me there and smile, really smile, and introduce me to his colleagues with pride. Maybe this was a chance to reconnect, to remind him that I was still here, still his father, still proud of everything he'd become. The Grandview Hotel was a place I'd only ever seen from the outside. One of those buildings where doormen in uniforms greet you and everything gleams with wealth and prestige. Walking through those massive doors felt surreal, like I was entering a different world, a world I didn't belong to. The ballroom was enormous, with crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling like frozen fireworks, reflecting light off polished marble floors that were so clean I could see my reflection. Round tables covered in white cloth filled the space, each one set with more silverware than I'd ever seen at a single-place setting. Men in tuxedos and women in evening gowns that probably cost more than I made in a year filled the room, laughing, sipping champagne, the sound of their conversations creating a constant hum of self-importance. I felt out of place immediately. My thrift store suit was too plain, too cheap-looking. My shoes, despite the polish, were obviously old. People glanced at me as I entered, their eyes sliding over me and away, dismissing me as someone who didn't matter, someone who probably wandered in by mistake. Maybe I was a server. Maybe I was lost. But I wasn't lost. I had an invitation. I had a right to be here. This was my son's night, and I was his father. I found a table near the back of the room, away from the center where all the important people sat. I didn't mind. I could see everything from here. I could see Marcos at the front of the room, surrounded by people, shaking hands, posing for photographs, smiling that confident smile I'd seen on magazine covers. He looked so handsome, so successful, so completely at ease in this world of wealth and power. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him perfectly, probably cost thousands of dollars. His hair was styled, his shoes gleamed, his watch caught the light. He looked like he belonged there, like he was born for this. I watched him, feeling that familiar swell of pride in my chest, that feeling that made all the sacrifice worth it. That's my son, I thought. That's my boy. I did that. I made that possible. I caught his eye once, across the room. He looked at me, and for a second, just a second, I thought I saw something in his expression, recognition, maybe even warmth. But then he just gave me a brief nod, nothing more. Not a wave, not a smile, just a nod, the kind you give to someone you vaguely recognize but don't particularly want to interact with. And then he turned back to the important people surrounding him, and I was forgotten again. I told myself it was fine. He was busy. This was his night. He had obligations. He'd come talk to me later. Surely he'd come talk to me later. The evening progressed with speeches and awards and endless toasts. Important people stood up and talked about Marcos, about his vision, his leadership, his impact on the industry. A woman from some tech magazine interviewed him on stage, asking him about his journey, his philosophy, his plans for the future. He answered every question with the kind of polished confidence that comes from doing this 100 times before. He was articulate, charming, humble in that false way successful people are humble, acknowledging challenges while making it clear he'd overcome them through his own brilliance. I listened to every word, searching for some mention of me, some acknowledgement of where he came from, of the people who helped him get here, but there was nothing. He talked about his education, but made it sound like he'd earned scholarships, like he'd worked his way through. He talked about his first failed company, but framed it as a learning experience, a necessary step on the path to success. He talked about being self-made, about not relying on anyone, about the importance of independence and self-sufficiency. Self-made. The words burned. I sat there in my cheap suit, my hands clasped in my lap, listening to my son describe himself as self-made, and something inside me began to crack. Then came the moment that changed everything. A reporter in the front row, a young man with thick-framed glasses and a notebook, raised his hand. "Mr. Delgado," he said, "you've talked extensively about being self-made, about building everything from nothing. But surely someone must have influenced you, supported you along the way. Who were the key people in your journey? Who helped shape you into the man you are today?" The room fell quiet. Everyone was looking at Marcos, waiting for his answer. This was it. This was the moment. I sat up straighter in my chair, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. This was when he'd acknowledge me, when he'd tell them about his father, about the sacrifices, about the love and support that made everything possible, when he'd finally make me visible. Marcos paused. He looked thoughtful, as if considering the question carefully. His eyes scanned the room, and for a brief moment, they landed on me. Our eyes met, and I saw something in his expression that I'd never seen before. Embarrassment. He was embarrassed by me, embarrassed that I was there, embarrassed to claim me as his own. And then he smiled, that practiced perfect smile, and he spoke. "Well," he said, his voice carrying easily through the microphone, "I suppose I should mention the old man who raised me." He gestured vaguely in my direction, not even saying my name. "That's him over there, Roberto, my father. A simple man, you know, hard-working, honest, but without much education. No business sense at all, really. He worked maintenance jobs his whole life, never amounted to much, but he did his best. I learned early on that if you want to succeed, you can't rely on the previous generation. They don't understand the modern world. You have to reinvent yourself completely, start from zero, build something new. Everything I am today, I built despite my humble beginnings, despite my circumstances. I had to overcome a lot, including the limited perspectives of people who couldn't see beyond their own small lives." The room erupted in applause, enthusiastic, admiring applause. People nodded knowingly, impressed by his resilience, his determination to rise above his origins. And they turned to look at me, all of them, 200 pairs of eyes, all looking at the old man in the cheap suit sitting at the back table. And in those eyes, I saw pity, not respect, not curiosity. Pity. They saw exactly what Marcos had described. A simple man, uneducated, unsuccessful, someone to feel sorry for, someone who'd been left behind while his son soared, someone who didn't matter. Marcos kept talking, but I didn't hear the words anymore. All I heard was the roar of blood rushing through my ears, the pounding of my heart like a drum beating against my ribs. My hands were trembling, my vision blurred. Not with tears, though God knows I had plenty of those stored up. No, this was something else. This was rage. Pure, white-hot rage that I'd been suppressing for years, maybe decades. Rage at being invisible. Rage at being erased. Rage at giving everything, my entire life, my entire self, and being reduced to 6 words. The old man who raised him. Not even my father, just the old man. Like I was some stranger, some hired help who'd been there temporarily and then faded into irrelevance. But beneath the rage, there was something else. Something colder, sharper, clarity. For the first time in years, maybe in my entire life, I saw everything with perfect clarity. I'd spent my whole existence making myself small, making sacrifices in silence, swallowing my pain, my needs, my very identity, all for the sake of someone who saw me as an embarrassment. I told myself that was love. That was what good fathers did. They gave everything and asked for nothing. They supported their children unconditionally, never expecting gratitude, never demanding recognition. But sitting there in that ballroom, listening to my son erase me from his story while 200 strangers pitied me, I realized something. Love shouldn't make you invisible. Sacrifice shouldn't erase you from existence, and I'd been erased long enough. My whole life, I'd let other people make me small. My own parents, who needed me to work instead of finish school. My bosses, who paid me poverty wages for backbreaking labor. The world, which looked at people like me and saw nothing worth noticing. And now my own son, the person I loved more than life itself, was doing the same thing. Making me small, making me nothing. And I was done. I was done being invisible. I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket, my hands still trembling but steady enough, and I felt the envelope I'd brought with me. I'd been carrying it for 3 weeks, ever since I got the invitation to this gala. I'd prepared it meticulously, going to the bank and requesting copies of decades worth of statements, digging through boxes of old documents I'd kept stored in the closet, organizing everything chronologically, making sure every piece of evidence was clear and undeniable. I hadn't brought it planning to use it. I'd brought it because some deep part of me, some part I didn't want to acknowledge, knew this moment might come. Knew that Marcos might disappoint me one final, devastating time. And now he had. The envelope contained everything. Every bank statement showing transfers to Stanford, every receipt for his tuition payments, every loan document I'd signed. The paperwork for the sale of my mother's house, with the notation that the proceeds went to educational expenses. The statements showing me cashing out my retirement fund. The loan documents for the $150,000 I borrowed to pay his debts. And most damning of all, the legal documents from the anonymous investment fund, the one that gave him $500,000 to start his current company. Documents that, if anyone looked at them carefully, would reveal that I was the beneficial owner, that I was the mysterious angel investor he always talked about with such reverence, never knowing it was his own father, the man he just described as having no business sense at all. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the marble floor loud enough that a few people turned to look. My legs were shaking, my knees weak, but I forced myself to stand straight, to walk with purpose. I started moving toward the front of the room, toward the stage, where Marcos still stood basking in applause and admiration. People watched me, confused. Security guards along the walls tensed, their hands moving toward their radios. An old man in a cheap suit, walking through a crowd of elites, heading toward the stage. I must have looked crazy. Must have looked like I was about to do something desperate, something embarrassing. And I was. But not in the way they thought. A security guard stepped forward, his hand raised to stop me. "Sir, you need to return to your seat." I looked at him. This young man in his crisp uniform, probably half my age, just doing his job. "I just want to say something to my son," I said quietly. "Just let me say something to my son." He looked uncertain, glancing toward Marcos on stage. Marcos had seen me approaching and his face had gone tight with alarm. "Dad," he said into the microphone, his voice carrying through the room, "this really isn't the time. Please sit down." "No," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, even without a microphone. "No, Marcos, this is exactly the time. This is the perfect time." The security guard looked at Marcos, waiting for direction. Marcos's jaw clenched. He could have me removed, could have me physically dragged out of this ballroom in front of all these people. And for a moment I thought he might. But then something flickered in his eyes, maybe fear, maybe curiosity, and he gave the security guard a small nod. Let him approach. I walked up the steps to the stage, my old shoes loud on the polished wood. Every eye in the room was on me now. The conversations had died completely. Even the waiters had stopped moving. 200 people holding their breath, watching an old man in a cheap suit approach the podium where the guest of honor stood. I reached the podium, and Marcos stepped aside reluctantly, his body language screaming discomfort. I took the microphone from the stand, and my hands were shaking so badly I had to grip it with both hands to keep it steady. I looked out at the crowd, at all those successful, wealthy, important people, and I took a deep breath. "I'm sorry to interrupt your celebration," I said, my voice rough, thick with emotion I was barely holding back. "I know I'm not supposed to be up here. I know I'm just the simple old man who raised him, the one without education or business sense. But I need to correct something important. This story you've all been hearing tonight, this narrative about being self-made, about building everything from nothing, about not relying on anyone, it's not true. It's a lie. And I can't sit here and let that lie stand unchallenged." I heard gasps, murmurs rippling through the crowd. Marcos stepped forward, his hand reaching for the microphone. "Dad, please don't do this." "Don't do what?" I asked, pulling the microphone away from his reach. "Don't tell the truth? Don't let these people know what really happened? Why not, Marcos? Are you ashamed? Are you embarrassed that your success isn't as self-made as you claim?" His face flushed red. "You're making a scene. You're embarrassing both of us." "No," I said firmly. "You embarrassed me, you erased me, and I'm done being invisible." I pulled the envelope from my jacket and opened it, my hands fumbling slightly but managing. Inside were dozens of pages, all organized with tabs and labels, the product of 3 weeks of meticulous preparation. "Let me tell you all a story," I said, looking back at the crowd. "A real story. About a father who loved his son more than anything in the world. About a father who worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs his entire life so his son could have opportunities he never had. About a father who gave up everything, his savings, his home, his future, his health, everything, so his son could succeed. Marcos, do you remember Stanford?" I looked at him, and he'd gone pale, his eyes wide. "Of course you remember. 4 years at one of the best universities in the world. $240,000 in tuition alone. Do you remember how that got paid?" He opened his mouth, but no words came out. "I'll tell you how," I continued, pulling out the first set of documents and holding them up. "I sold my mother's house, the house I grew up in, the only valuable thing I owned, $80,000. That covered your first 2 years. For the last 2 years I worked double shifts, 70, sometimes 80 hours a week, and I sent you every penny I could save. I lived on rice and beans. I stopped heating my apartment in winter. I wore the same clothes until they fell apart. And I sent you money every month without fail, so you never had to worry, never had to work, never had to feel the weight of financial stress I carried every single day." I pulled out more documents. "And then there was your MBA, $80,000. You said it was essential for your success, remember? That it would open doors. I cashed out my retirement fund to pay for that. 42 years of savings, gone. I lost 30% of it to penalties and taxes, but I did it anyway, because you needed it. I was 60 years old, and I gave up any hope of ever retiring so you could have that degree." The crowd was completely silent now. Some people had their hands over their mouths. Others were leaning forward, listening to every word. "And then your first company failed," I went on, my voice starting to break but pushing through. "You called me, sobbing, saying your life was over because you owed $150,000. Do you remember what I told you?" Marcos's eyes were filled with tears now, his face contorted with emotion. "I told you it wasn't over, that I'd help you, and I did. I took out a loan, a massive loan that I'll never be able to pay off, not in my lifetime. I used my rental property as collateral, risked losing everything, and I gave you that money, all of it, to pay your debts, to give you a fresh start." I pulled out the final set of documents, the most important ones. My hands were shaking so badly now I could barely hold them. "And then there was this company. The one that made you rich and famous. The one that made you a tech visionary. Do you remember 5 years ago when you couldn't get funding, when you were about to give up because nobody believed in your idea, and then suddenly, mysteriously, an anonymous angel investor appeared and gave you $500,000? The crowd leaned in even further. This was the revelation they didn't see coming. Marcos's face had drained of all color. He was shaking his head slightly, not in denial but in disbelief, as if he couldn't believe I was really doing this. I was that investor, Marcos. That anonymous benefactor you've talked about in every interview, the one you called a blessing, a miracle, someone who believed in you when nobody else did. That was me. I took out the biggest loan of my life, $500,000. I used everything I had left as collateral, my apartment, my car, everything. I set up an anonymous fund through a lawyer because I didn't want you to know. I didn't want you to feel guilty. I just wanted you to succeed. I wanted you to believe someone out there saw your worth, saw your potential. And you did succeed spectacularly. But that investor wasn't some mysterious wealthy benefactor. It was your father, the simple old man with no business sense. It was me. I placed all the documents on the podium, spreading them out so the cameras could see them, so everyone could see the proof. Bank statements, transfer receipts, loan agreements with my signature, the legal documents from the investment fund showing my name as the beneficial owner. All of it, undeniable, irrefutable. Here it is, I said, my voice barely more than a whisper now, all my strength draining away. Every receipt, every transfer, every sacrifice, everything I gave you. I'm not showing you this to take credit for your success, Marcos. You did work hard. You are brilliant. You built something remarkable. But your success was never from nothing. It was never self-made. It was built on the back of a father who gave up his entire life, his entire future, everything he had and everything he'd ever have, because he loved you, because he believed in you, because he wanted you to have what he never could. Tears were streaming down my face now, and I didn't bother wiping them away. Let them see. Let them all see the pain of a father who'd been erased by his own son. I didn't do this expecting gratitude, I said. I didn't do it expecting to be acknowledged or thanked or even remembered. I did it because that's what love is. That's what a parent does. You give everything. You sacrifice everything because your child's happiness, your child's success matters more than your own life. But standing here tonight, listening to you describe yourself as self-made, hearing you tell these people that I'm just some simple old man you had to overcome, a limitation you had to transcend, that broke something in me. Because it means you don't just not appreciate what I did. It means you're ashamed of it, ashamed of me, ashamed of where you came from, ashamed that your empire was built on the sacrifices of an uneducated maintenance worker who wasn't good enough to be part of your success story. I turned to face him directly now, looking into his eyes. You wanted to know who shaped you, who made you who you are. It was me, Marcos. Every step of the way, every degree, every company, every success. It was me, and you just told a room full of strangers that I was nothing, that I amounted to nothing, that I was someone you had to rise above. So let me ask you something. If I'm nothing, if I amounted to nothing, then what does that make your success? Because without me, without my sacrifices, without my love and my money and my faith in you, you wouldn't be standing here at all. The silence that followed was absolute. You couldn't hear anyone breathing. The only sound was my own ragged breath, the pounding of my heart, the rush of blood in my ears. I picked up my documents, carefully organizing them back into the envelope. I'm not asking for your money, I said quietly. I'm not asking for a share of your company. I'm not asking for anything except this. Don't ever, ever erase me again. Don't erase any of the people who loved you and sacrificed for you before you were someone important. Because your success isn't yours alone. It belongs to everyone who believed in you, who supported you, who gave up pieces of themselves so you could have everything. And when you pretend those people don't exist, when you claim you did it all yourself, you don't just hurt them. You diminish yourself. You become smaller, not bigger. You become exactly what you accused me of being, someone who doesn't matter, someone who amounts to nothing. I turned and walked off the stage, my legs barely holding me up, my entire body shaking with exhaustion and emotion. And then something happened that I didn't expect. One person started clapping, just one. A woman near the front, then another person joined, then another. And within seconds, the entire room erupted in applause. Not polite golf claps, but real, thunderous applause. People stood up one by one until everyone in the room was on their feet, giving me a standing ovation. Some of them had tears running down their faces. Some were shaking their heads in disbelief. Some were looking at Marcos with expressions that ranged from disappointment to disgust. I walked down the steps, through the crowd, and people reached out to touch my shoulder, to shake my hand, to whisper words of support and admiration. You're the real success story. Your son should be ashamed. You're a hero. You're an inspiration. I'm an older executive. A man I recognized from one of the business magazines gripped my shoulder and said, "I've been in this industry 40 years, son. I've met every kind of successful person there is, but you're the first one I've met tonight who actually deserves respect." A younger woman, probably a journalist, pressed her business card into my hand. "Please," she said, "let me tell your full story. The world needs to hear this." I nodded, took the card, and kept walking. Behind me, I could hear chaos breaking out. The carefully controlled atmosphere of the gala had shattered. People were talking loudly, some arguing, some crying. I heard Marcos's voice, pleading, trying to get everyone's attention, trying to explain, but nobody was listening to him anymore. I'd changed the narrative, I'd rewritten the story, and the version I told was the truth. I walked out of that ballroom, out of the Grand View Hotel, into the cool night air. I stood on the street corner for a moment, just breathing, letting the sounds of the city wash over me. Car horns, distant sirens, people laughing somewhere nearby. The world kept turning, life kept going, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt like I was part of it, like I existed, like I mattered. The aftermath came fast and hit Marcos like a freight train. By the next morning, the story was everywhere. Every news outlet, every tech blog, every social media platform. But the story wasn't about the brilliant CEO and his meteoric rise anymore. The story was about the father he betrayed, about the elderly man who sacrificed everything and got nothing in return except humiliation. The headlines were brutal. Tech CEO's self-made success, built on father's secret sacrifices. The angel investor he never thanked was his own dad living in poverty. Roberto Delgado, the real hero behind Innovatech's success. Marcos Delgado's empire of lies. Social media was even worse. The video of my speech had gone viral, millions of views in hours. People were outraged. They were calling Marcos every name you can imagine. Entitled, ungrateful, arrogant, a fraud. Some people created memes comparing him to other famous ungrateful children in history. Others started fundraising campaigns to help me pay off my debts, though I refused to accept any of that money. This wasn't about money. It had never been about money. Marcos's business started falling apart almost immediately. 3 major investors pulled their funding within the first week, citing concerns about leadership character and ethical standards. 2 of his business partners quit, publishing an open letter about how they could no longer work with someone who treated his own father so callously. The board of directors called an emergency meeting. Several of his biggest clients cancelled their contracts, not wanting to be associated with someone who'd become the internet's favorite villain. His stock price plummeted. His net worth dropped by tens of millions, literally overnight. And he tried desperately to reach me. He called constantly, dozens of times a day. I'd look at my phone and see his name flashing on the screen over and over, and I'd just let it ring. He left voicemails, long rambling messages where he apologized, explained, begged for another chance. "Dad, please, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean those things. I was just trying to impress them. I was trying to fit in. Please call me back. Please, I need to talk to you. I need to explain. I need you." But I didn't answer. I couldn't. Not yet. He showed up at my apartment building, pounding on my door at all hours. Dad, please, open the door. We need to talk." The neighbors complained. Building security had to escort him out. He'd leave gifts outside my door, expensive things I'd never want or need, designer clothes, a new television, envelopes full of cash. I gave them all away to neighbors who could use them. He sent me letters, dozens of letters, apologizing over and over, each one longer than the last, each one more desperate. But I didn't respond. Because here's the thing, I'd spent my entire life making myself available to him. My entire life being there whenever he needed me, sacrificing my own needs, my own existence to support him. And he'd spent his adult life making me invisible, so now I was making him feel what that was like. The silence, the absence, the not mattering. After 3 weeks of this, I received a letter that was different from the others. It was handwritten, but carefully written, every word chosen deliberately. It was 10 pages long, front and back, and I could see places where the ink had smudged because tears had fallen on the paper. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd looked at his Stanford acceptance letter all those years ago, and I read it. "Dear Dad," it began, "I don't know if you'll read this. I don't know if you've read any of my letters. Maybe you've thrown them all away, and I wouldn't blame you if you did. But I need to write this, even if only for myself, to say the things I should have said years ago, decades ago, maybe my whole life. I was ashamed. That's the truth I've been trying to avoid, the reality I didn't want to face. I was ashamed of where I came from. Ashamed of our tiny apartment, ashamed that you worked maintenance jobs while my Stanford classmates had fathers who were doctors and lawyers and CEOs. Ashamed that you didn't understand the things I was learning, the world I was entering. And I thought, I truly believed, that distancing myself from that past would make me more successful, more accepted, more worthy of being in those rooms with those people. I built my entire identity on the lie that I was self-made, that I came from nothing and built everything through my own brilliance and hard work. And the more successful I became, the more I had to maintain that lie, because if I admitted the truth, if I acknowledged all the help I'd received, especially from you, it would mean admitting that I wasn't special, that I wasn't uniquely gifted, that I was just lucky enough to have a father who loved me more than he loved himself. I knew what you'd done for me. I knew about Stanford, about the MBA, about paying my debts. I pretended I didn't know. I pretended I believed my own lies. But I knew. And with the angel investor, I suspected. Part of me always suspected it was you, but I didn't want to know for sure because then I'd have to acknowledge it. And acknowledging it would destroy the narrative I'd built. The narrative that made me feel successful, that made me feel worthy. What I said at the gala, calling you a simple old man with no business sense, saying I had to overcome my humble beginnings, that was the culmination of years of denial, years of trying to convince myself and everyone else that I was something I'm not. And in doing that, I destroyed the most important relationship I had. I destroyed the man who made me. Dad, you were right about everything. My success isn't mine alone. It never was. It was built on your sacrifice, your love, your belief in me when I had no reason to believe in myself. Every degree I earned, you paid for. Every company I built, you funded. Every step I took, you made possible. And instead of honoring that, instead of celebrating you and thanking you and making sure the world knew that my father was the reason I succeeded, I erased you. I made you invisible. I treated you like an embarrassment, like something to be hidden and forgotten. And that's the worst thing I've ever done. Worse than any business failure or mistake. Because I didn't just hurt you. I betrayed you. I betrayed the man who gave me everything. And the letter went on, page after page of apologies and realizations and regrets. He talked about how he'd lost almost everything in the aftermath of that night. How investors had pulled out, how partners had left, how his reputation was destroyed. But he said that losing all that didn't hurt nearly as much as losing me, as knowing that he'd hurt me so badly that I couldn't even look at him anymore. I don't want your forgiveness because I think I deserve it, he wrote near the end. I don't deserve it. I don't deserve anything from you. You've already given me everything, and I've given you nothing but pain. But I'm asking for it anyway. Not because I have any right to it, but because I can't live with this guilt anymore. I can't live knowing that the man I love most in this world, the man who sacrificed everything for me, can't even stand to hear my voice. I've stepped down as CEO. I've sold my shares in the company. I'm walking away from everything, moving somewhere quiet where maybe I can figure out who I really am when I'm not pretending to be someone I'm not. I hope someday, maybe years from now, you'll be able to see me again. Not to forgive me, not to let me back into your life, but just so I can look you in the eye and say I'm sorry, so I can tell you that you were the best father any son could ever have, and I was the worst son imaginable. I love you, Dad. I've always loved you. I just forgot how to show it. I forgot that love means honoring people, not erasing them. Forgive me or don't. Either way, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the sacrifices you made, even if you never see it. Your son, Marcos. I read that letter 3 times, sitting at my kitchen table as the afternoon light faded into evening, and I cried. Not from anger anymore, but from something more complicated. Relief, maybe. Grief for the years we'd lost. Hope that maybe, just maybe, he'd learned something. That this pain had taught him what all my sacrifices couldn't. I took out a piece of paper, my own hand shaking as I wrote. My response was much shorter than his. I didn't have 10 pages in me. I didn't have the energy for that, but I had truth. Marcos, I wrote, I got your letter. I've gotten all your letters, actually. I've read everyone. And I want you to know that I forgive you. Not because you asked for it, and not because I think everything is fixed now. I forgive you because holding on to this anger, this hurt, it's killing me too. It's making me someone I don't want to be. Someone bitter and hard and closed off. And I didn't survive everything I survived just to become that. But forgiveness doesn't mean things go back to the way they were. It doesn't mean we can just pick up where we left off or pretend none of this happened. You hurt me in a way that changed me. You taught me something I wish I'd learned earlier, that love, real love, requires more than sacrifice. It requires respect. It requires seeing the other person, truly seeing them, acknowledging them, making them visible. And you didn't do that. For years, you made me invisible. You erased me from your story because I didn't fit the narrative you wanted to tell, and that hurt more than any physical pain I've ever felt. I don't want your money. I never wanted your money. I don't want a share of your company or a piece of your success. I don't want anything material from you at all. What I want, what I've always wanted, is simple. I want you to remember. Remember where you came from. Remember the people who loved you before you were successful, before you were important, before you were someone the world paid attention to. Remember that your success was built on the shoulders of people who gave you everything and asked for nothing in return. And never ever erase those people again. Not me, not anyone. Because when you do that, when you pretend you did everything alone, you don't just hurt them. You diminish yourself. You become smaller, not bigger. You become a lie instead of a truth. I hope you rebuild your life. I genuinely do. I hope you find peace and happiness and success again, but a different kind of success. The kind that doesn't require erasing your past or the people who helped you. The kind that makes you proud, not just of what you've achieved, but of who you are. But I won't be there to see it. Not for a while anyway. Maybe someday. Maybe when enough time has passed and enough healing has happened. But right now, I need to take care of myself. For the first time in my entire life, I'm choosing me. I'm living for me. I'm existing for me. And that might sound selfish, but I think I've earned the right to be selfish for a little while. Take care of yourself, mijo. Learn from this. Become the man I always believed you could be, the man your mother would have been proud of. And when you tell your story from now on, tell the truth. All of it. The good, the bad, the shameful parts, the parts where you needed help and received it. Because that's the story worth telling. Not the lie of being self-made, but the truth of being loved. Dad. I mailed that letter the next morning, and then I started living again, really living. Not just surviving, not just working and paying bills, and existing in the margins of someone else's story. I started taking care of myself. I went to a doctor for the first time in years, got my back looked at, my blood pressure checked. I started eating better, actually buying fresh vegetables instead of just the cheapest food I could find. I started spending time with my neighbors, people I'd lived near for years, but never really talked to, because I was always working or too tired or too focused on Marcos to notice anyone else. I found out Mrs. Chen on the third floor was a widow too, and she made the most amazing dumplings. I found out Mr. Rodriguez down the hall was a retired teacher who loved chess and was happy to teach me. I found out that Maria, the young woman in 2B, was struggling as a single mother, and I started watching her kids sometimes when she had to work late, finding joy in their laughter that I hadn't felt in years. I didn't see Marcos again after that. I heard through various sources that he'd moved away, like he said he would. I heard he was working at a non-profit now, something about mentoring young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds, helping them get funding and support. I heard he'd started speaking publicly about privilege and gratitude and the importance of acknowledging the people who help us succeed. I heard he was different, humbler, more honest. I hoped it was true. I really did. Not for my sake, but for his. Because living with that kind of guilt, that kind of shame, it eats you alive from the inside. I knew that because I'd lived with my own kind of guilt for years, the guilt of never being enough, never doing enough, never mattering enough. About a year after that night at the Gala, I received a package in the mail. No return address, but I knew it was from Marcos. Inside was a book, not a published book, but a handmade one, leather-bound, with thick, cream-colored pages. On the cover, in simple gold lettering, it said, "The Real Story." I opened it, and inside was his new version of his journey, the true version. It started not with his first company or his education, but with a chapter called My Father. Page after page about me, about Elena, about our life together, about the sacrifices made, the love given. He'd written it all down, every detail, every sacrifice I'd mentioned that night at the Gala and more. Things he'd remembered that I'd forgotten. Times I'd gone without so he could have. Moments of love and support that he'd noticed even when I thought he hadn't. And at the end of the book was a note. "Dad, this is the story I should have told from the beginning. The story I'll tell from now on to anyone who will listen. Not because I want forgiveness or redemption, but because it's the truth. And the truth is that I wouldn't exist, not as the person I am, not with any of the success I've had, without you. You were always the hero of this story. It just took me too long to realize it. I love you. Always. Marcos." I read that book cover to cover, sitting in my apartment with tears streaming down my face. Not tears of pain this time, but something else. Release, maybe, or recognition. Recognition that the story had finally been told right, that I'd finally been seen, that I'd finally been made visible. So here I am now, at 73, still living in my small apartment, still working part-time, because I'll never be able to afford not to. I'm not rich, I'm not famous. Most people who hear my name don't know who I am, and that's fine. But I have something now that I didn't have before. I have my dignity. I have my self-respect. I have the knowledge that I did everything I possibly could for my son. And even though he couldn't see it for a long time, eventually, finally, he did. And I have proof, in the form of a handmade book and a changed life, that my sacrifices weren't invisible. They mattered. I mattered. And that's enough. That has to be enough, because I'm too old and too tired to keep chasing recognition or validation or love from people who aren't ready or willing to give it. I have to find it in myself. I have to know my own worth, independent of what anyone else thinks or says or believes. And I do know it. That night at the gala, when I stood up and walked to that stage and told the truth in front of 200 strangers, I wasn't just telling them who I was telling myself, reminding myself that I exist, that I have value, that I deserve to be seen. And nothing that happened after, not the media attention or the public vindication, or even Marcos's eventual remorse, nothing mattered as much as that moment of standing up for myself, of refusing to be invisible anymore. You see, the lesson here isn't really about revenge. It's not even about justice, though there was a kind of justice in what happened. The lesson is about worth. Your worth doesn't come from what others think of you, not your children, not your employers, not society, not anyone. It comes from knowing, deeply knowing in your bones, what you've given, what you've sacrificed, what you've contributed to this world and to the people in it. And it comes from standing up for yourself when someone tries to take that knowledge away from you, when someone tries to erase you, to make you invisible, to reduce you to nothing. I'm 73 years old. My hands are still rough and calloused. My back still aches every morning. My apartment is still small. My clothes are still old. My bank account is still nearly empty. By society's standards, by the standards of those people at that gala, I haven't accomplished much. I'm nobody important. But I know something they don't know, something Marcos didn't know for most of his life. I built something more valuable than any company or fortune. I built a human being. I took a boy who had nothing and gave him everything. I took potential and turned it into reality. I took love and transformed it into opportunity. And even though that human being forgot me for a while, even though he erased me and diminished me and treated me like I was nothing, the fact remains that without me, he wouldn't exist. Not the successful version of him anyway. And that matters. That has value. That is worth something, even if it's not worth anything in dollars or recognition or fame. And here's something else I learned, something that might be the most important lesson of all. You can love someone with everything you have, sacrifice everything for them, give them your whole life, and they can still hurt you, they can still fail you, they can still disappoint you in ways that cut so deep you think you'll never recover. And that's okay. It doesn't mean your love was wasted. It doesn't mean your sacrifices were for nothing. It means you're human, and they're human, and humans are complicated and flawed, and sometimes we hurt the people we love most without even meaning to. The question isn't whether you'll be hurt. The question is what you do with that hurt. Do you let it make you bitter? Do you let it close you off from ever loving again, ever trusting again, ever being vulnerable again? Or do you feel it, acknowledge it, learn from it, and then choose to keep living anyway? Choose to keep loving anyway, even if it's different now, even if it's more careful, more guarded. I chose to keep living, not for Marcos, not for anyone else, but for me, because I deserve to live. I deserve to exist. I deserve to be seen. And I don't need anyone else to give me that permission anymore. I give it to myself. There's a photo I keep on my refrigerator now, held up with a magnet shaped like a sunflower that Mrs. Chen gave me. It's from that night at the gala, taken by someone in the crowd on their phone and sent to me later by the journalist who wanted my story. In the photo, I'm walking off the stage, my head held high, and behind me, the entire room is standing, applauding. You can see Marcos in the background, collapsed on his knees, his face in his hands. It's not a photo I look at with satisfaction or pride or vindictiveness. I look at it as a reminder that I stood up for myself, that I refused to be invisible, that I told my truth even when it was hard, even when it hurt, even when I knew it would change everything. And I did it not because I wanted to destroy Marcos or get revenge, but because I needed to exist. I needed to be real. I needed to matter, at least to myself. Sometimes people ask me if I regret what I did that night, if I regret humiliating my son in front of all those people, destroying his reputation, costing him his company. And I tell them the truth. I don't regret it. Not even a little bit, because I didn't humiliate him. He humiliated himself. I just refused to participate in his lie anymore. I refused to let him erase me, refused to let him rewrite history in a way that made him the hero and me the obstacle. All I did was tell the truth. And if the truth humiliated him, well, maybe he should have lived a truth worth telling. But I also tell them this. I don't celebrate what happened. I don't take joy in his fall. I don't feel triumphant that he lost everything while I gained recognition. Because at the end of the day, he's still my son. He's still the little boy I held in my arms when he was born, the child I comforted when his mother died, the young man I believed in when he didn't believe in himself. And I still love him. Love doesn't just disappear because someone hurts you. It changes, it transforms, it becomes more complicated, but it doesn't vanish. I love him enough to hope he becomes better. I love him enough to want him to learn from this, to grow from this, to become the kind of man who doesn't need to erase others to feel successful. But I also love myself enough now to know that I can't sacrifice my own dignity, my own existence, my own worth on the altar of that love. Not anymore. I gave enough. I sacrificed enough. And now I'm choosing me. There's a kind of freedom in that choice that I never experienced before. For 72 years, I defined myself through other people, through my parents, who needed me to work, through Eleanor, who I loved and wanted to provide for, through Marcos, who became my entire reason for living. I never asked who I was separate from all that, never asked what I wanted, what I needed, what would make me happy. I just existed in service to others, making myself smaller and smaller until I almost disappeared completely. But I didn't disappear. I'm still here. And for the first time in my life, I'm asking those questions. Who am I? What do I want? What makes me happy? The answers are simpler than I expected. I want to wake up in the morning without pain, or at least with less pain. I want to have coffee with Mrs. Chen and listen to her stories about growing up in Shanghai. I want to play chess with Mr. Rodriguez and lose gracefully because he's much better than me. I want to watch Maria's kids and hear them laugh and remember what it was like when Marcos was that young and innocent and full of joy. I want to read books I never had time to read, watch movies I never had money to see, take walks in the park without rushing because I have somewhere else to be. I want to exist without purpose beyond the simple act of existing, without having to justify my presence or prove my worth or earn my right to take up space in this world. I want to just be. And I'm learning how to do that. It's harder than it sounds, learning to just be after a lifetime of doing, of serving, of sacrificing. But I'm learning. Some days are better than others. Some days I wake up and feel that old familiar guilt, that voice that says I should be doing more, being more, helping more, that says existing for myself is selfish. But then I remember that night at the gala, Remember standing on that stage and telling my truth, and I remind myself, I've earned this. I've earned the right to be selfish. I've earned the right to choose myself. And that voice gets a little quieter. I think about Elena sometimes, wonder what she'd think about all of this. Would she be proud of me for standing up for myself? Would she be disappointed that I exposed Marcos's lies? Would she understand? Or would she say I should have kept sacrificing in silence, kept making myself small because that's what love is? I like to think she'd be proud. I like to think she'd put her hand on my cheek the way she used to, look me in the eyes with those warm brown eyes of hers, and say, Roberto, mi amor, you did good. You did real good. It's time to rest now. It's time to live. Because she loved me, really loved me. Not the way Marcos loved me, which was conditional, dependent on my usefulness, my willingness to stay invisible. Elena loved me for who I was, not what I could do for her. And I think she'd want me to love myself that way too, to see myself the way she saw me, as someone worthy, valuable, deserving of care and consideration and respect. I'm trying to see myself that way. Some days I manage it. Some days I look in the mirror and see not just an old man with rough hands and tired eyes, but someone who survived, who loved deeply, who gave everything and still found the strength to demand to be seen. Those are good days. Other days, I just see an old man, and that's okay too. You don't have to feel triumphant every day. You don't have to feel strong or proud or vindicated. Sometimes you just have to feel tired and old and human, and that's enough. That's still worth something. I've started writing things down, keeping a journal of sorts. Not for anyone else to read, just for me. Writing down my memories, my thoughts, my feelings about everything that's happened. Writing down stories about Elena, about young Marcos, about the life we had before everything got complicated. Preserving those memories before they fade completely, before age takes them from me the way it takes everything eventually. It's therapeutic, writing it all down, getting it out of my head and onto paper where I can look at it, examine it, understand it better. And sometimes, when I'm writing about the good times, the early years when we were happy and together, and the future seemed full of possibility, I find myself smiling. Really smiling, not the sad, wistful smile of someone lost in nostalgia, but a genuine smile of gratitude for having experienced that love, that joy, that connection, even if it didn't last forever. Nothing lasts forever. Not happiness, not pain, not success, not failure. Everything changes, everything evolves, everything eventually ends. And there's a strange comfort in that impermanence. It means the pain I feel won't last forever. It means the hurt Marcos caused will eventually fade to something more manageable, something I can live with. It means there's always the possibility of something new, something different, something unexpected around the corner. At 73, I don't have many corners left, but I have some, and I'm going to round them with my head held high, with my dignity intact, with the knowledge that I matter, that I exist, that I deserve to be seen. If there's one thing I want people to take away from my story, it's this. Don't wait until you're 72 to stand up for yourself. Don't wait until someone has erased you so completely that you have to make a dramatic scene just to exist. Don't sacrifice yourself so completely that there's nothing left. Yes, love your children. Yes, support them, help them, give them opportunities, but don't give them so much that you disappear. Don't make yourself so small that they forget you're there. Don't teach them that your needs don't matter, because they will believe you. They will treat you the way you treat yourself. And if you treat yourself like you're invisible, like you're not worth acknowledging or respecting or honoring, they will too. It's not their fault, not entirely. It's what you taught them. So teach them something different. Teach them that love includes respect, that sacrifice doesn't mean erasure, that supporting someone doesn't require destroying yourself. Teach them to see you, really see you, to acknowledge what you do and who you are and what you're worth. Not in a demanding way, not in a way that makes them feel guilty, but in a way that's honest and real and honors the relationship you have. Because relationships can't survive invisibility. They can't survive one person existing only in service to another. They need balance, mutual respect, mutual acknowledgement. They need both people to be visible. And here's something else. It's never too late to become visible again. Never too late to stand up and say, I'm here, I matter, I deserve to be seen. It might be hard, it might cost you, it might change everything, but it's worth it. God, it's worth it. Because existing in the shadows, being invisible, being erased from your own story, that's not living, that's just surviving. And you deserve more than survival. You deserve to live, really, truly live, even if it's just for the last chapter of your life, even if it's just for a few years or months or days. You deserve to exist fully, openly, visibly. You deserve to matter. Not because of what you've done for others, not because of what you've sacrificed or given or provided, but simply because you're human, because you're here, because you exist, and existence itself has value, has worth, has meaning. I'm learning that now at 73, after a lifetime of thinking my worth came from what I could do for others, and it's the most important thing I've ever learned. More important than any lesson I could have taught Marcos, any wisdom I could have passed down. This lesson is for me. I matter. Not because of him, not despite him, just because I do. Just because I'm here. Just because I exist, and that's enough. That has to be enough. That is enough. So here I am sitting in my small apartment writing this story, telling this truth, not for vindication or recognition or to make Marcos look bad, but to remind myself, and maybe to remind you too, that we all deserve to be seen. We all deserve to exist. We all deserve to stand up and say, this is who I am. This is what I've done. This is what I'm worth. Even if our voices shake when we say it, even if we're terrified, even if we know it will change everything, because being invisible is a kind of death. And I'm not dead yet. I'm still here, still breathing, still existing, still mattering. And I held my head high that night at the gala, and I've held it high every day since. Not because I destroyed my son's reputation, not because I got revenge, not because the world finally saw what I'd sacrificed, but because I stood up for myself, because I refused to be invisible, because I chose to exist. And that choice, that simple but profound choice to be seen, to matter, to exist, that's the victory, that's the triumph, that's the lesson. Your worth doesn't come from others. It comes from you, from knowing yourself, honoring yourself, standing up for yourself, and no one, not even your own children, can take that away unless you let them. I let them for too long, but not anymore. Never again. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story, until the end of my truth. If my story has left you with a lesson, if it's reminded you of your own worth, or inspired you to stand up for yourself, or helped you see the invisible people in your own life who deserve to be acknowledged, then share this story. Share it so others can learn what took me 72 years to understand. Dignity has no age. Worth has no price. Existence requires no justification. You matter. Right now, exactly as you are, you matter. Don't let anyone make you forget that. Not your children, not your employers, not society, not anyone. You matter. Remember that. Hold on to that. Stand up for that. Because you deserve to be seen. You deserve to exist. You deserve to live. And it's never ever too late to start. Subscribe to Top Life Stories, where every day we prove that standing up for yourself is never too late, and that the truth, no matter how painful, will always set you free.